It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Stu Heinecke, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, a complete excuse me, I'm going to try that one more time. How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, a complete strategy for unstoppable growth. Stu, it's truly an honor to speak with you again. Welcome back to the show.
Oh man, Shaun, great to join you once again.
Yes, I always like bringing your new books to my audience. I feel like I always get stretched and I grow every time I read your books or talk to you. And so I'm eager to share that with my audience as well. It's been a number of years since we last spoke, so I'm going to kick this off likely the same place we did last time, and that's by asking you to share a bit of the Stu Heinecke origin story. So for somebody meeting you for the first time in our talk today, give them a little bit of context. What are a few things they should know about you?
I have a crazy background. I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists. I've written several books. I'm a Hall of Fame nominated marketer. My two books are they're kind of unusual. I mean, one of them is how to get a meeting with anyone. Kind of a brash title, but it actually works. I mean, if you can't get meetings, you can't sell. Nothing happens in business. Certainly, probably in life, if you can't get meetings with people. And that book turned out to be what was named one of the top 64 sales books of all time. So I'm pretty excited about that. It was a book about, mischief, really, but using mischief to get through to people that otherwise you wouldn't get through to. And then now this latest book is the book we're going to be talking about today, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. And I should tell you, there is a really interesting story to where that came from. I was driving down the Santa Monica Freeway many years ago when the freeway when the traffic used to move really fast in LA. I don't think it does anymore. So driving down the freeway, and there were 6 lanes of traffic coming this way, another 6 going this way. And in the middle, there was about a 40-foot wide concrete median. And growing in a crack, going from a crack in the concrete median, there was a dandelion. And, that's not an unusual sight. We see dandelions and other weeds doing that all the time. But I don't know, that time it really caught my attention. I just thought, wow, look at this thing, just sort of bouncing around happily with those happy yellow flowers and those geodesic seed pods blowing seeds around, and just looked happy. It was just as it ran its process from the crack in concrete. And I just thought, that's really impressive. And I can't imagine that weed is sitting there saying, well, this really sucks. I really saw myself as living at the beach, right? Like we would let those kinds of thoughts get in our way. It wasn't letting any of that get in the way. It was just running its process. And I think it was also significant that it wasn't, let's say, an apple tree or a petunia or something else growing out of the crack, because let's face it, those plants don't have what it takes to be a weed. So as I whizzed by them, that was a lot of thought for just like, oh, what was that? As I drove by. But as I continued on, I was just thinking, what an incredible example for, resilience and adaptability and persistence. And so all the great things that you need to be very successful in business. What an amazing example that set. And from that point on, I just thought, I hope I can live up to that example in my career and in my businesses. And it just caused me to commit to figuring out, well, what is it that makes a weed a weed? Why do weeds grow like weeds? What is it is there a model that they use? And it turned out, as I went further along and wrote the book, yeah, there is. They come in all shapes and sizes. They show up anywhere and everywhere, and but they all follow the same format for this explosive and sustainable growth.
Wow, that was a lot for just driving by a weed on the freeway. I want to ask a little bit about kind of how that kind of simmered and your kind of your creation and research process. I want to just touch back on How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. I would rank that book up there with like Never Eat Alone or some of the foundational books I personally read just as I was coming up in the business space. And I think what I like about that, partly I think it relates back to as a guy who was in the tech space and software company space for about 11 years, where sort of hacker culture, social engineering was very valued by myself and all of my peers. I think just you come at things so out of the box and creatively and sideways and show us how to accomplish goals of making contacts with people in a way that was just very different from a lot of the traditional kind of broadcast models. It was like being very focused and intentional and specific. And so I'll say for me, ranks up there probably my top 5 foundational business reads
Wow.
of my career. In terms of just, so you drive by, you see a dandelion growing in the median. What did that look like for you for that to just kind of simmer? Did you write it down in a journal? Was that just kind of percolating in the back of your mind and you're like, this could be a book someday? How did that differ creatively from the 2 books tied to contact marketing or like research process wise of just thinking about a book? I'm just curious, what was the time frame you sat on this before it was time for a book to come about?
You know, there's a lot to respond to there. And so, first of all, thank you. That's an amazing honor if it's one of your top 5 books. And I'm striving to write books that I wish I had when I was 20. If I was in my 20s and I had these books, my career might have taken a different a different turn. I don't know, but and then I'll also say that that these books they're business books, of course, but I think they're the kinds of books that perhaps only a cartoonist could write. If that makes any sense, I'll help it make sense right now. If you look at what cartooning is about and what humor is about, it's about truth revealed in a twist. I mean, it's why when we laugh at something, we're always going, before we can even finish laughing, we're going, oh my God, that's so true. And in fact, that's what's happening. Truth is being revealed in a twist. And so that's been very useful I've used cartoons in marketing most of my career. And I guess the thing is that there's this process that you go through when you create a cartoon, that what you're really creating is an insight. And it's an insight that is outside of, perhaps a little bit outside. It has to be a little bit outside. And that's where the twist comes from, sort of outside of the way that people would normally think of it. And so my books end up being constructed in probably the same way. I hope that helped make more sense. So for the weeds, I mean, I drove by the weed that day, and I've just been noticing them. I had been noticing them ever since, and I've been thinking, well, okay, well, if I'm going to be a weed, well, how do I do that? What are weeds doing? And who are great examples of people that act like weeds or have created weed-like growth in their businesses? And it all just, it just slowly gelled into maybe what you could call a cartoon, really, because it's almost what it is.
Well, and I remember, goodness, a year and a half ago, I don't remember exactly when it was. I'd seen some interaction with you on social media talking about, hey, I'm working on this new book about weeds, and you're sharing some cover concepts and some different things. And I remember in my mind, like, how the heck is he going to pull off a book like this using weeds? I was so perplexed yet intrigued at the same time, mostly because, historically, we paint weeds in a negative light. They're an annoyance. There's something we have to work crazy hard to get rid of in our landscaping and in our yard. And you're kind of turning that on its head and being like, actually, there's a lot of positive things we can learn from weeds. And you and I had a conversation a number of months back, and we touched on it briefly before we started the interview. Just as you've been working on this project, you tapped into some amazing insights that I think even surprised you in the creation process of putting this book together. Just, I guess, talk to us a little bit about how kind of this out of the box understanding of weeds came about, and just how have you processed that? Because it is so out of the box. I'm amazed that you put this together.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I think to answer that, I should explain what that weeds model is, what the formula is that they all use. And so what I discovered is that, again, they come in all shapes and sizes. They're all over the world, but they all follow the same formula, and that is they leverage a fierce mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale, and they do it according to a process that is millions of years old, but able to adapt at a moment's notice. Really on the scale of a lightning strike. When you consider that their process is when they're about I don't know, hundreds, at least tens of millions of years old. And that means their process is really well honed and it's the same age. So it's mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale, and according to a process that is programmed into their DNA. They just run it like a computer runs a program. So, I mean, all of the insights flow from that. I mean, if you think about, let's say, well, by the way, well, you mentioned weeds, they're annoyances. So, and I just mentioned the weed mindset. So I have to explain. We're not talking about this. It's not about a bunch of guys smoking some dupes. It's that apparent mindset you see when you watch what weeds do in your lawn and in your garden and out on the roadside and maybe farmland. They're just aggressive. They never give up. They and they have these these unfair advantages built into what they do. For example, if we think about the common dandelion and you think about the seeds, those seeds don't just drop. They don't they're not like acorns or really most any other seed. They don't just drop. They fly. They can fly for miles. There's some forms of weeds that have seeds sort of like the dandelion seeds, but those seeds fly hundreds of miles. I mean, the seeding area of a single plant. It's a Canada. I'm thinking of the Canada fleabane plant. It has these seeds with these big tufts on it, and these things fly hundreds of miles. And the seeding area of a single plant can be seen from space. I mean, that's huge. That's crazy. That's really an enormous unfair advantage when you think about, let's say, the distribution map of a dandelion, which is all six continents, excluding no weeds in Antarctica, but otherwise all six continents. And then you look at, let's say, the distribution map of sequoia trees. They're the biggest trees we know of, and they only live near Fresno. That's it. They've not spread very far. They're not very successful as spreaders, as conquerors of new territory.
Well, and I just love just that you're able to pull on some of those positive elements that we wouldn't normally think of in terms of like persistence, getting knocked down and getting back up again. You think of just how weeds always seem to pull through no matter what man or nature throws at them. The next day they're back up in the ditch or in the yard or whatever, ready to go back at it. I do have kind of an interior design question just to take a side trail for a moment. I'm assuming because you have an artistic bent that book interiors are important to you. So in terms of like, each chapter has like a weed with a picture and a description. Was there some intentionality around the different weeds that we encountered throughout the chapter layout, or was that merely a design feature? I was curious about that.
Well, I guess it's both. I mean, there's this richness of antique botanical renderings of all plants, really, but certainly of all the weed species. So I licensed from the Royal Botanic Garden in Kew in London. These old, they're really just these beautiful line art botanical renderings. So those had the start of each chapter, and each chapter starts with a specific weed, a specific weed species, and they're chosen for, I don't know, just various attributes. For example, there's a weed, a crazy weed called water hemp, and that one starts the chapter on seed strategy within the weeds model. So seeds are analogous to anything that causes people to become aware of us and form the intent to transact with us in some way. They might follow us on social media. They might become clients, whatever it is. We're spreading seeds, or I'm spreading seeds with you right now about the book. So that's a seed strategy. And so at the head of that chapter, I started it with water hemp. Dandelions pop out about, let's say, about 15,000 seeds over a 5 to 10 year lifespan. That's a lot of seeds. When we can see it, they're all over the place. But that's nothing compared to water hemp. Water hemp pops out as many as 4.8 million seeds. That's one of their great unfair advantages, is that those seeds, they're tiny and they just fall into the soil, and they're not going, that plant is not leaving. You're not going to get rid of that plant. That's a totally unfair advantage that it uses to take, there's many others that it uses, but that it uses to take over farmland. So yeah, throughout the book, great, a great opportunity to share these beautiful renderings of weeds, but also to highlight the various unfair advantages that each of them brings to their field.
I just envision everybody who reads your book is going to start decorating their office space with different weed art just to give them some kind of inspiration as they continue to grow their business. In terms of the idea of weeds being disruptive, I think that's probably one of the probably more difficult things for people to step into is being willing to be like, I'm going to be disruptive. Because again, not unlike weeds, we think of being disruptive in a negative light, but how can we look at that as being a superpower, a special ability, an unfair advantage of just being willing to disrupt the status quo, maybe go against the grain, if you will?
Well, I mean, among entrepreneurial circles, disruption is a prized attribute. It's, if you introduce a disruptive technology, then you may end up introducing a company like Uber or Airbnb or many others. So disruption is a very good thing. It makes me think back to Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma. So if you're not familiar with it, it's a brilliant book, a seminal book about companies that were market leaders, just juggernauts in their markets, and they all were toppled by other technologies that were disruptive technologies. So, great example of that is Eastman Kodak. Remember them, the ones that used to make film? I guess they're still around, but they used to make film for cameras. We used to go to their kiosks and have them develop our pictures from our cameras. And the interesting thing is, a junior engineer, just somewhere in the bowels of the company, came up with the first example of, well, he invented digital photography, and they ignored it. Isn't that amazing? So digital photography obviously disrupted film photography, and it did it in a way. I mean, it's good for us as consumers because we got more immediate. We were able to see our pictures right away. We didn't have to pay to have them developed. They were right there in our camera, and we could manipulate them in Photoshop and other programs, and we all became much better photographers because of that. Well, if they had paid attention to that one innovation, then Eastman Kodak might still be on top, but they're certainly not. It's kind of surprising they're still in business. So that's the mess. I mean, that's the form of disruption that we're talking about. Sort of. We know that weeds are very aggressive about taking over territory. And in business, we have to do that as well. We've got to be very aggressive about that and urgent, and we've got to push forward, or we have no reason to be in business. If we don't have unfair advantages, we have no business being in business. I mean, these are just sort of basic building blocks. You're in competition. And so if you're in competition, you've got to compete ruthlessly. And that's part of what disruption is all about.
Well, I think maybe an interesting way to try to illustrate this, if we have somebody who's maybe they're 2 years into, maybe that's just they're a solopreneur or a small business with a handful of employees. If they were just to step into this process, walk us through a little bit of some of the initial things they might go through.
Well, happily do that. The thing I want to say, though, is that you got to read the whole book and you got to take into account the entire model. But having said that, one of the first things that weeds would tell us, if they could speak to us, is, well, you described a small company, and I assume then that just sort of in that realm, we have an owner who probably operates a lot on one-to-one leverage. So that is sort of doing everything yourself. You're part of the deliverable stream. I'm guilty of that in my own business. It's not criticizing everybody else, but that is what the weeds would tell us, is that you've got to root out all forms of one-to-one leverage and immediately jump to multi-level leverage or scale. And the reason you do that is because, well, I mean, what that means is you're creating alliances and strategic partnerships. You're reaching out and gathering let's say, access to other companies and other people's um, customer bases and so forth. I mean, when we start to collaborate, that's when we become much bigger as a business, and as our footprint becomes much bigger in our marketplace. It's a lot like if you think about, I don't know, let's say you spot a dandelion in your lawn, um, and if it was just the one dandelion, it wouldn't be much of a factor. You'd just go get the weed puller and pull it out. But look up and you'll see that if you see one, well, there really are at least dozens there, if not hundreds. And and that's the whole point here, is that when they show up like that, when they show up as a collective, they're a force that you're never going to get rid of them, really. You can try and you can pull all of them up, but they've already spread their seeds, and you won't get rid of them. Um, that they're that competitive against, sort of competing against our efforts to keep a lawn. Our lawns are disrupted ground. They love disrupted ground. They live for that. So, yeah, does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, yeah. I think the place I'd love to have you go next, and you've mentioned this already, is the idea of an unfair advantage. Again, you know, just by the way it's phrased, it sounds like it's not okay because it's unfair. Talk to us a little bit about just getting uncomfortable, or getting comfortable with not only discovering but really stepping into using some of these unfair advantages, because that's that leverage to some extent that's going to help you to go further faster.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. What? So when I first started my career, I was creating direct mail campaigns for publishers, magazine publishers, and we used cartoons. I was bucking. I'm like, we were all told we weren't supposed to use humor in direct mail, but I knew that I was a cartoonist, and I knew what cartoonists were and how powerful they were. So I thought, no, I'm going to do it. And so we ended up creating a lot of campaigns that set new records for response for these magazines. So I knew that from what I was doing, I was creating unfair advantages for those clients. So they put out this mailing, and it would go out, and people would react to the cartoon on the mailing like they would a cartoon in the pages of a magazine, which is, I mean, they're always the best read and remembered parts of magazines and newspapers. So the mailings became the best read and opened part of the stack of mail that people got that day. That's an unfair advantage. But it's only unfair in the eyes of your competitors, and you should be right. I mean, they're the ones who should be saying, "Well, that's unfair. I can't compete with that." And you want those kinds of advantages. I guess another way to put it would be to call them force multipliers, because you do them, and they give you much greater leverage than what everyone else is doing. Now, that's not really an unfair advantage, but it is. I mean, because who's the advantage for, or who is it? What's it used to compete with? It's to compete with your competitors, and you want them to say, you want them to respond to these things you're doing, saying, God, I mean, how are we going to compete with this? So those are the unfair advantages I'm talking about.
Yes, we've all been up against competition and feeling like they have all the advantage, and we've got nothing. It's time to try to turn those tables and get that force multiplier working for your advantage. In terms of people stepping into the process, they start making shifts in their business. With anybody stepping into something new, I'm curious how often they should revisit the core process, evaluate, maybe come up with pivot points. So, for the person who really embraces this, how do they calibrate along the way?
Well, again, read the whole book, apply the whole model. So that means, and I went through the model again, but I'll do it again earlier. I did it. That there's a mindset adjustment. You need to become fierce. This is a fierce mindset. This is a very competitive mindset, but it's also an optimistic and happy and healthy mindset to put yourself into. And you need to be there because you need to be at your best. You need to be at the best possible form you can be. And then you're going to be using the WEEDS model, and that's an acronym, which stands for Weed Inspired Enterprise Expansion and Domination Strategies. You need to use that WEEDS model. There are 8 levels of strategy within the model that help you produce unfair advantages. You need all the unfair advantages you can get because, as you just pointed out, if you don't have them, your competitors will. You need unfair advantages to stay in business and to thrive. And then you want to be looking at, well, how do I go? How do I go from one-to-one leverage? Where do I, let's say, where am I suffering from using one-to-one leverage and holding myself back? And how can I root that out? How can I get rid of that? How can I start collaborating with others to create a bigger footprint in my marketplace and really a bigger business? And then that word process is really interesting because I'm a solopreneur and I've been that my whole life. And I've always felt I hate to say this about myself. It's like something someone else should say, but I am creative. I mean, I create cartoons and so on. So, I feel like, well, I want to figure out my own way. I want to come up with essentially my own process. But I don't want to. The word process has always sounded to me like I don't know, just sort of a bureaucratic thing. Something there's just sort of a speed bump in your head. Oh gosh, now I got to sit down and watch these videos and read these manuals, and I'm going to have to memorize all these rules, and that's how I'm going to operate. Boy, that's the worst way I can think of to operate. But here's the thing the thing that I discovered about process in writing the book is I had it all wrong. Process is really how expertise and experience are gathered together and then mapped across the entire operation, the entire organization, so that the entire group acts as an expert. That's really valuable, but it becomes even more valuable. There are a lot of, if you talk to financial advisors who work with business owners, they'll tell you that they've had a lot of experience with owners that reach kind of like my age, and they start saying, okay, I want to cash in because I've been building this business my whole career, and I've been doing it with the idea that I'm going to cash in. I'm going to have a big liquidity event to sell my business. And they have this terrible burden that they've got to go through with these kinds of clients because they're saying, okay, do you have a recorded process? Do you have a team? But also, do you have a recorded process? Is there a process here that you can sell? But it has to be part of what you sell. And if they don't have that, if they don't have a recorded process, then they don't have a business. That's what the advisors have to tell these people. Then what you've actually done is you've created the perfect job for yourself, but you can't sell a job. So, if you're going to be applying this, you need to apply all of those levels. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think the first place to start changing the scale of your business, because I'm doing the same thing, is to look at scaling. I have a lot of great unfair advantages already. So how do I scale what I'm doing? Because everything I'm doing is really does suffer from one-to-one leverage. So how do I root that out? And I root that out by reaching out to the great thought leaders, sales thought leaders that I've been in touch with because I interviewed them for my meetings books, and I'm doing that now. And I'm just saying, how do we need to collaborate? So how do we bring, let's say, my big board campaign or big board program that we use to get meetings? How do we bring that to your clients? And then let's set up a revenue share. But are you open to that? Can we do that? And they are open to it. So it expands your business right away. So I think that's probably the first step would be after you read the book and take all of these things into account. I think the quickest way that you can grow your business is to start looking at how you can create those alliances.
And I think that, whether you're a business owner, solopreneur, you've got a small company, or if you're just an influencer, there's a lot of influencers who, earn a living through their podcast and their live stream, and they've got sponsors and all kinds of things. And I could see this process and this book being just as applicable there. As a guy who ran call centers for a long time, recording processes and understanding your processes is critical for not only being able to teach others or pass something on to somebody else, but also to see where there are places where you could find more efficiencies, or that there's redundancies that you need to deal with and things that you need to clean up. And I love too how you just shared that this is something you're having to apply in your own life, and it's causing you to actually change how you're approaching your own business, regardless of what space a book is in, whether it's business, marketing, personal development, the faith space that I work in. I'm always excited when an author tells me that they actually put their own process that's in their book into practice in their own life and in their own business, because that tells me if you wrote the book and it's working for you to make a difference in your own life, that means it's going to be widely applicable to the audience and anybody who picks up that book as well. I guess if you had to paint a vision on the other, and you've kind of already answered this, but I always kind of like to move towards wrapping up in this space. Somebody puts in the time, they read the book. How is life going to look for them on the other side of the journey if they put all these things to work?
Well, their business should grow. They should be recording a process so that it's something that they can sell if they want to sell, but certainly something that can operate without them, so they can take vacations and the business doesn't stop. So I see a lot more autonomy, a lot of growth, a lot bigger footprint in your marketplace, probably other entries into other marketplaces. If you offer something that's sort of a personal service, I see people productizing that so that it can be sold on a much broader basis. So everything becomes bigger. The scale changes of everything that you're doing. And I would say that I would expect that the business just goes straight up.
Well, we'd all love to see that hockey stick kind of growth in anything that we're pursuing, business, hobby, or otherwise. Stu, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more about what you do, finding out more about your books, where do we discover you on the web?
Well, visit my author site for sure. If you go to stuheinecke.com, there's an offer for 2 free chapters of the how to grow your business like a weed. That's pretty cool. There's also cool merchandise. If you don't mind, I'll just show. So, for example, cheap weed.
There's going to be a big run in the next year of people promoting that they need to hire chief weed officers. Definitely.
Yeah, I think there will be chief weed officers in short order. That's right. That's true.
Well, and like we do with every episode, we'll make it easy. We'll have links in the description and the show notes to Stu's website, as well as links to places where you can pick up your very own copy of this brand new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Stu Heinecke. Once again, our book today was How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, a complete strategy for unstoppable growth. And Stu, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Shaun, thank you so much. I've watched your podcast grow over the years as well, and I just want to tell you, you are a total weed, and it's a big compliment.